This is the story of Benaiah, a mighty man who learned that true bravery means facing impossible challenges with faith and skill. Once upon a time, in a frost-bitten canyon hidden from the sun, Benaiah moved like a shadow across the snow. His breath came in slow, measured puffs, each one disappearing into the icy air. He pressed his back against a jagged rock, eyes scanning the pit below. Inside, the lion circled. Its heavy paws crunched the snow, its whiskers flicked with frost. Every few moments it stopped, sniffing the air, muscles rippling beneath its golden coat. As he watched, his mind drifted. Not to trees or sunny fields, but to a memory of long nights in his father's old courtyard. There by a single oil lamp, young Benaiah practiced footwork on cold stone floors. His father had drawn lines across the ground with chalk, forcing him to step perfectly, to pivot like a dancer, to strike with power but never lose balance. "Bravery isn't noise," his father had said one night, his voice echoing off the empty walls. "It is quiet as a heartbeat, steady as the moon." While other boys bragged at wells or threw stones for fun, Benaiah learned to control every breath, every glance, every finger on the hilt of a weapon. His mother often found him practicing at dawn, dew soaking his hair. But Benaiah didn't crave the crowd's cheers. He craved that small, steady voice inside, the one that whispered, "Keep moving, keep trusting, keep standing when the world runs." That training shaped him more than any sword ever could. By the time he was old enough to fight, he had already learned the true shape of courage, a mix of skill, quiet faith, and the patience of a hawk watching the earth below. His reputation grew not because he shouted about victories, but because he did what no one else dared, calmly, fiercely, and without fanfare. And now, standing on the edge of a frozen pit, all that training pulsed through his veins like fire. The lion paused, eyes turning upward. Its golden gaze met Benaiah's. A slow, deep growl rolled out, vibrating the rocks. Benaiah tightened his grip on the spear. He breathed in once, steady and slow, and whispered, "Lord, you taught my hands to fight. You guided my steps in darkness. Today, let me honor you in the pit." With a single push from his powerful legs, he dropped down into the pit. Snow sprayed around them like shards of glass. The lion lunged, teeth bared, but Benaiah twisted, sliding across the icy floor. His spear flashed once, swift, sharp, certain. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then the lion shuddered and fell still, its great body collapsing into the snow. Benaiah stood over it, chest rising and falling, eyes shining not with pride, but with a deep, fierce peace. He pressed a hand to the lion's mane, whispering, "May they know you are stronger than any beast, any giant, any fear." Above, the cold sky began to glow with the first blush of morning light, and Benaiah lifted his eyes, ready for whatever challenge waited beyond the pit. Benaiah climbed out of the snowy pit slowly, each step heavy with the memory of the fight. His arms and shoulders burned from the strain, but his eyes stayed sharp, watching the horizon as the first rays of sun crept over the canyon walls. Not far beyond the ridge, a dusty plain stretched out beneath the sky. Benaiah could see faint figures moving, soldiers training, sparring with wooden swords and shouting as they charged each other in clumsy lines. He knew a new threat waited there, a giant Egyptian warrior. Word had spread through the camps like wildfire. A man taller than two ordinary soldiers, with arms as thick as tree trunks and a spear that looked more like a small tree than a weapon. As Benaiah stepped forward, his mind flickered back again. Not to childhood lessons this time, but to nights under stars with David's mighty men. They sat together after long marches, armor piled beside them, wounds still fresh and stinging. Benaiah always sat a little apart, sharpening a blade or checking the balance of his staff. One night, one of the younger men asked him, "Why do you fight without fear, Benaiah? You face lions, giants. You don't even flinch." Benaiah looked up, his eyes catching the flicker of the firelight. "Because fear is like a wild horse," he said. "It only runs free if you let go of the reins. But if you hold tight, guide it, you can ride it straight into the heart of the fight." Another soldier had snorted. "So you're saying you're not afraid?" Benaiah had shaken his head slowly. "No," he answered, "I am afraid, but I don't let fear choose my path. Faith does." Now, standing on that empty plain, Benaiah felt the giant's presence before he saw him. The ground seemed to shiver with each step as the Egyptian emerged from a circle of watching soldiers. The giant carried a massive spear, its tip gleaming in the morning sun. Across his shoulders hung a heavy shield, carved with strange patterns that looked like roaring beasts. The Egyptian laughed when he saw Benaiah's simple staff. "Do you plan to herd goats with that?" he roared, shaking his spear in mock greeting. Benaiah's lips curved into a faint smile. "If the goat is as loud as you, maybe," he called back calmly. The soldiers around the circle erupted in startled laughter, some slapping each other's shoulders in surprise. But the giant's face turned dark, his grin twisting into a snarl. With a roar, the Egyptian lunged forward, spear whipping through the air with terrifying speed. Benaiah moved in a blur, darting past the first thrust and sweeping his staff in a tight arc that cracked against the giant's shin. The Egyptian stumbled, surprised by the sudden sting. Benaiah kept moving, a step to the left, a pivot to the right. Striking, dodging, always just beyond the giant's reach. Each movement felt like a dance Benaiah had been practicing his whole life. He heard his father's voice echo inside him, steady as the moon, quiet as a heartbeat. The giant raised his spear high for a killing blow, but Benaiah twisted inside the swing and slammed the staff into the Egyptian's wrist. The spear clattered to the ground, and in one fluid motion, Benaiah kicked it away. Breathing hard, the giant swung a massive fist, but Benaiah ducked low, his staff sweeping the giant's legs from beneath him. The huge warrior crashed to the ground, the earth shaking under his weight. Benaiah pressed the tip of his staff to the giant's throat, holding him still. Silence spread through the soldiers around them. Even the wind seemed to pause. Benaiah looked down, his face calm but full of strength. "Bravery isn't the size of your weapon," he said softly. "It's the size of your trust in the one who guides your hands." He stepped back, letting the giant gasp and roll away. Then Benaiah picked up the spear and planted it upright in the earth like a banner. Turning away, he felt no need for cheers or praise. The quiet victory was enough. Each fight was not just a battle of weapons, it was a test of faith, a living story whispered to every watching soul. And Benaiah, the lion slayer, the giant defeater, walked on, ready for the next impossible challenge that would shape his courage even more. Benaiah left the dusty plain behind, his steps quiet and steady. The giant's spear still stood planted in the earth, shining like a silent monument to what true bravery could accomplish. By the time he reached David's camp, the sun was sinking, painting the hills in deep gold and purple. Fires crackled here and there, and the smell of roasting meat drifted on the breeze. Warriors sat sharpening swords, mending torn cloaks, or laughing in low voices. When Benaiah appeared, a hush fell over the camp. Heads turned, and a few men rose to their feet, staring. A tall warrior named Asahel stepped forward first. "Benaiah, we heard rumors. They said you took down a lion and a giant in the same season." Benaiah shook his head, lifting his hands. "I did not take them down alone," he said firmly. "I had help greater than any army." Another man, Elhanan, leaned on his spear and laughed. "You mean David sent you a secret force?" Benaiah's eyes softened. He stepped closer and tapped his chest with 2 fingers. "This force," he said, "the courage God plants here, the quiet voice that tells me to step forward when everything in me wants to run." David himself emerged from his tent, his cloak draped loosely over his shoulders. His sharp eyes scanned Benaiah from head to toe, lingering on the dried blood on his tunic and the scrapes on his hands. "Tell me," David said, his voice low but warm. "Did you fight for my name? Or for your own?" Benaiah lowered his gaze and dropped to one knee. "Neither," he answered softly. "I fought so they would see the power of the living God, so they would know no giant, no beast, no man stands above him." David's face broke into a wide, knowing smile. He reached out and lifted Benaiah to his feet. "Then you understand what true strength is," David said. "Not in the sword, but in the heart that trusts beyond the sword." The other warriors crowded around now, eager to hear every detail. One man asked, "Were you afraid in that pit with the lion? Didn't your legs shake?" Benaiah chuckled, rubbing his scarred knuckles. "Of course I was afraid," he admitted. "But I learned that bravery isn't about not feeling fear. It's about standing anyway, even when your bones rattle like dried reeds." A young guard, barely old enough to hold a shield, stepped forward shyly. "Master Benaiah," he said, voice cracking, "do you think someone like me could become brave enough to fight giants too?" Benaiah looked at the boy for a long moment, his dark eyes kind but fierce. He placed a strong hand on the boy's thin shoulder. "You start by being brave in small things," he said. "Wake before the dawn when you'd rather sleep. Step forward to help when everyone else hides. Hold the line when your friends falter. That's where giants are defeated. Not in the arena, but in the heart first." The boy nodded slowly, his eyes lighting up like the first stars above them. David clapped Benaiah on the back. "Stay close to me," he said. "A heart like yours should guard the king himself." Benaiah dipped his head, his chest rising with a deep, quiet breath. He didn't crave titles or songs sung in his name, but to serve with purpose, to guard what mattered most, that was an honor no crown could match. As night settled, the fires glowed bright and warm. The warriors gathered closer, leaning in as Benaiah began to share more of his battles, not just the fights with weapons, but the daily struggles of the soul. Because for Benaiah, every story, every scar, and every victory pointed to something higher than himself. And so, by the light of crackling flames and under a sky full of stars, a new chapter of courage began. One that would echo in hearts long after the battles were over. The next morning, before the sun had crept over the hills, Benaiah stood at the edge of David's camp. The ground was still damp from the night's dew, and a quiet mist curled around the tents like a patient cat. David approached him, wearing a simple cloak. In his hand, he held a small, smooth stone, a reminder of his own youth and the battle with Goliath. "Benaiah," David said, pressing the stone into his friend's hand. A king needs more than a sword to stay safe. He needs watchful eyes, steady hands, and a heart that listens to God above all. Benaiah looked down at the stone, feeling its weight. He understood what it meant. Not just guarding David's life, but guarding the mission God had given him. I will watch when others sleep, Benaiah vowed, and I will stand when others run. David smiled, but his eyes held a tired sadness. There will be enemies who hide behind smiles, he warned. Not every fight will be with a lion or a giant. Some battles are fought in whispers and shadows. Later that day, Benaiah took his place just outside David's tent. He watched every movement. Servants carrying water, scribes rushing with messages, even musicians tuning their harps. His gaze landed on a tall counselor named Abiel, who had a habit of glancing too often over his shoulder. Abiel smiled at everyone, but when he thought no one was looking, his eyes narrowed with a cold gleam. As the day passed, Benaiah stepped closer, pretending to adjust a shield leaning against a post. He heard Abiel whispering to another man. "The king is weak with mercy," Abiel hissed. "We could lead better. We could take his place if we had the right moment." Benaiah's hands tightened around the spear shaft at his side. He didn't move yet. Instead, he stepped back, waiting, listening, studying every word like a hunter watching for a faltering hoofbeat. That night, after the fires dimmed and the court slept, Benaiah approached David quietly. "My king," he said, his voice low but firm, "there is poison inside the camp, not in a cup, but in the hearts of those who dream of your throne." David looked up from a psalm he had been writing, his face calm but grave. "What would you do, Benaiah?" Benaiah didn't hesitate. "I would watch them closely, test their words, and wait for the right moment to uproot them. A rotten branch must be cut before it infects the whole tree." David nodded, setting his harp aside. "Then do as your heart and God's wisdom lead you," he said. Over the next days, Benaiah walked the camp at dawn and dusk. He ate with the guards, listened to rumors, and looked into the eyes of each man as if reading a scroll. He found plots hidden under polite greetings and betrayal growing like weeds in the corners of council meetings. But each time, Benaiah remembered the lion's eyes in the pit, the pure, raw test of courage. This was different, but just as dangerous. And he would meet it with the same steady faith. Quietly, with patience sharp as his spear, he began to expose each plot one by one. He didn't crave rewards or praise. Protecting the king was more than duty to him. It was the beating heart of his purpose. Because true bravery wasn't just in facing roaring beasts or giants on open fields, it was also in guarding the unseen, standing silent in the shadows, and keeping a pure heart when no one applauded. And Benaiah, the lion slayer, had chosen that hidden fight with joy. The moon hung heavy and bright that night, pouring silver light over the camp like a silent watchman. Most soldiers slept soundly, their swords stacked neatly beside them, dreaming of home or old battles. But Benaiah did not sleep. He stood just beyond David's tent, every sense sharp as a blade. His hand rested lightly on his spear, and his eyes swept over the quiet shadows. Inside, David prayed softly, his voice rising and falling like a gentle breeze. Benaiah listened to every word, finding strength in those whispered songs to God. Suddenly, he heard it. The faintest rustle of leather on stone. His head snapped to the right. A figure moved through the shadows, gliding low to the ground, a dagger glinting briefly in the moonlight. Benaiah's heart slammed against his ribs, but his mind was steady. He stepped forward, his spear sweeping out to block the figure's path. The assassin froze, his eyes wide behind a thin cloth mask. "You shouldn't be here," Benaiah said, his voice low and even. The assassin lunged suddenly, dagger slashing toward Benaiah's side, but Benaiah pivoted, catching the man's wrist and twisting sharply. The dagger clattered to the ground. In a single movement, Benaiah pinned the man to the earth, pressing his spear tip to his neck. Around them, guards began to stir, shouting and rushing to their feet. David emerged from his tent, his face pale in the moonlight. He took in the scene silently, his eyes meeting Benaiah's. Benaiah kept his gaze on the would-be killer, breathing hard but controlled. "You aimed for a king," he said quietly. "But God's watch is stronger than your blade." The assassin thrashed once more, but Benaiah didn't waver. With a swift motion, he disarmed him completely and bound his hands behind his back with a strip of rope from his own tunic. David approached slowly, looking down at the trembling man. Then he turned to Benaiah, his eyes full of both grief and gratitude. "You saved my life tonight," David said, his voice hushed but fierce. Benaiah shook his head, his grip firm on the prisoner. "God saved your life," he corrected. "I am only the hands he used." David placed a hand on Benaiah's shoulder. "You understand something many warriors never learn," he said softly. "Victory is not in the might of arms, but in the heart that listens for God's whisper." Benaiah's face softened, and for a moment, he looked almost like the young man practicing footwork by lamplight all those years ago. David turned to the guards. "Take this man away," he ordered. "We will not let evil take root among us." As the guards led the prisoner away, the camp slowly settled again, though the air felt charged, as if the stars themselves had been watching. Benaiah stood watch the rest of the night, his spear resting across his back. Even as the horizon began to glow pink and gold, he did not relax. He knew now, more than ever, that his calling wasn't only to swing a spear in open fields, but to protect what was sacred in the hidden hours, in the dark when no songs were sung and no cheers rang out. That night, Benaiah learned that true bravery is not only about standing against giants and lions. It is about standing silently, faithfully, when no one sees but God. And Benaiah, the silent guard, felt more alive than he ever had in any roaring battlefield. After the attempted attack on David, whispers spread through the camp like wind through dry grass. Some men praised Benaiah, calling him a hero. Others watched him with narrowed eyes, muttering that no man should have so much power so close to the king. Benaiah noticed the sidelong glances. He felt the space around him tighten at meals, the quiet, when he entered a circle of soldiers. One evening, as he sat sharpening his spear near the edge of the camp, a group of warriors approached. Their leader, a broad-shouldered man named Shammah, stepped forward. "We need to talk," Shammah said, crossing his arms. Benaiah didn't look up from his spear. "Then talk," he replied calmly. Shammah took a step closer, his voice dropping. "Some say you staged that attack on the king to win his favor. You have too much influence now, too many eyes on you." Benaiah finally looked up, his dark eyes steady and sharp. "If I wanted praise, I would have stayed in the city gates, boasting with the young men," he said softly. "I serve the king because I serve the king above all." Another warrior spat on the ground. "Easy to say," he snapped. "Prove it." Benaiah stood slowly, towering over the men, though he remained quiet and still. "How would you have me prove it?" he asked. Shammah hesitated, then glanced at the others. "Tomorrow there is a water run to Bethlehem. It's dangerous. Philistine scouts watch the roads and the wells are guarded. Fetch water for the king from the well by the gate. Bring it back untouched. Do that, and we will believe you." A hush settled. Everyone knew that well was surrounded by enemy swords. Benaiah tilted his head, a small smile flickering across his face. "If that is what you need," he said, gripping his spear, "then so be it." The next morning before dawn, he set off alone. The men watched from the ridge, expecting him to turn back or fail. Benaiah moved like a wolf in moonlight, slipping between rocks, crouching behind thorn bushes. His breathing matched the rhythm of the earth beneath him, steady and patient. He reached Bethlehem just as the sky blushed with the first hint of light. Philistine guards lounged by the well, swords resting across their laps. Benaiah didn't hesitate. He burst from behind a stone wall, striking one guard's arm and knocking him flat before the others even stood. He ducked under a wild swing, twisted his spear upward, and sent a second guard stumbling into the dust. In a blur of movement, he plunged the water jug into the well, filled it, and vaulted back over the wall, vanishing before the last guard could shout. When he returned to camp at midday, his tunic was torn, dust caked his hair, and the water jug gleamed in his arms, unspilled, unspoiled. Shammah and the other warriors stared in stunned silence. Benaiah set the jug gently before David. "Water from the well by the gate of Bethlehem," he said simply. David's eyes shone with tears. "I cannot drink this," he whispered, voice shaking. "It is as precious as the blood of the brave." And he poured it out before God as an offering. Shammah stepped forward slowly, head bowed. "We doubted you," he admitted, voice thick with shame. "We forgot that true courage does not shout. It acts." Benaiah looked at him kindly. "We all forget sometimes," he said. "What matters is remembering who we fight for." From that day, no one questioned his loyalty again. His courage had been proven not in loud boasts or heavy armor, but in quiet faith and unwavering devotion. And Benaiah, the silent shield of the king, stood taller than any tower that day. Not because men finally understood, but because he had stayed true to the quiet voice inside him all along. After the mission to Bethlehem, Benaiah's name spread even farther, not just among David's warriors, but all throughout the valleys and hills. Mothers whispered stories of him to restless children at night. Young soldiers traced his footsteps, hoping some of his courage would rub off on them. But one evening, as twilight spread across the camp and stars winked into the darkening sky, a messenger arrived, breathless and wide-eyed. "Benaiah!" he called, stumbling into the circle of guards. "We've captured an old enemy, the one who betrayed your father's house years ago." Benaiah froze. His fingers tightened around his spear. Memories he'd long buried rushed up like a sudden flood. The betrayal that forced his family to flee, the man who spread lies that turned neighbors against them. He rose slowly and followed the messenger beyond the outer fires. There, tied to a post, was an older man with thin, wild hair and deep lines carving his face. His eyes flickered with fear as they locked onto Benaiah. "You," the man croaked. I never meant—" Benaiah stepped closer. The guards drew back, watching with silent anticipation. They knew Benaiah's strength. Many expected to see that power unleashed in fury tonight. The old man trembled, his shoulders shaking. "Please," he rasped, voice cracking. "Spare me. I was hungry. I was scared." Benaiah stared at him, his jaw clenched. The memories throbbed in his chest like an old wound. His father's disappointment, his mother's tears, the long nights of running, hiding. He raised his spear slowly, and the guards leaned in, eyes wide. But then Benaiah stopped. His grip loosened, and he dropped the spear to the ground with a heavy thud. "No," he said softly, almost to himself. "Strength is not just to crush. It is to choose mercy when you can easily destroy." The old man fell to his knees, sobbing, unable to speak. Benaiah stepped forward and untied the ropes with strong, steady hands. He pulled the man to his feet. "Go," he said, his voice low but clear. "Start again. If God allows you another chance, don't waste it." The man stumbled away into the night, his cries echoing in the distance. Silence settled over the guards like a thick blanket. One finally stepped forward, confusion written all over his face. "Why did you let him go?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. Benaiah turned to them, his gaze steady and burning. "Because the greatest victory is not always over an enemy's body," he said. "Sometimes it's over your own heart." Another guard bowed his head, gripping his sword tighter as if suddenly understanding its true weight. That night, as Benaiah returned to his place beside David's tent, he felt a strange warmth spread through him. Not pride, but peace. The peace of knowing he had obeyed the quiet voice he had followed all his life. Above him, the stars shone brighter than ever. And for the first time in many battles, Benaiah felt as though he had won something far greater than a field or a pit. He had won the secret fight inside his own soul. At dawn, the quiet of the camp was broken by the sound of urgent footsteps. David's trusted advisor arrived, breathless and pale, his cloak fluttering behind him like a torn banner. "Benaiah," he called, his voice trembling. "King David asks for you at once. It is a matter of life and kingdom." Benaiah rose immediately, grabbing his spear. Without a word, he followed the advisor through the winding paths between tents and watchfires. Inside David's tent, the king stood bent over a small wooden table, his fingers tracing a rough map. He looked up when Benaiah entered, relief flickering across his tired face. "Benaiah," David said, motioning him closer, "we have word of a secret alliance forming beyond the hills. A small faction plots to overthrow me while pretending loyalty. If they succeed, the kingdom will shatter." Benaiah's jaw tightened. "Tell me where, my king," he said simply. David placed a hand on his shoulder, eyes heavy with the weight of leadership. "I need you to go ahead quietly, discover their leaders, and stop this before it grows teeth. But remember, no noisy victory. We need to root out the poison quietly so the people do not lose heart." Benaiah nodded, absorbing every word. "I will move like a shadow and strike like lightning," he promised. David managed a faint smile. "That is why I trust you above all," he said. Before dawn fully broke, Benaiah set out alone, winding through rocky trails that snaked above hidden valleys. Hawks circled overhead, and the scent of wild thyme rose with each step. Along the way he whispered prayers under his breath, not for easy success, but for clear vision and an unwavering spirit. As he crested a ridge, he saw a small cluster of tents below, guarded by men who shifted restlessly. At the center, a low fire burned, casting strange shadows on the leaders gathered around it. Benaiah crouched behind a boulder, studying every movement. His eyes narrowed as he listened to bits of sharp, hissing conversation. "We strike when the city gates are open," one man said, stabbing a stick into the dirt. "While David prays in the courtyard, we will slip inside." Another man nodded. "Then we declare him weak, and the people will follow us like sheep." Benaiah felt a slow fire light inside his chest. He waited until two guards wandered to the edge of the camp, then slipped down silently, moving from rock to rock like a hunting cat. When he reached the center tent, he found a thin rope stretched between two posts. He grabbed it, yanked it tight, and used it to trip the first guard silently. As the man fell, Benaiah pressed a hand over his mouth, whispering, "Sleep." The leader stepped out of the tent, startled. Before he could shout, Benaiah moved forward in a blur, disarming him and pushing him to the ground. "Your whispers end tonight," Benaiah said, his voice calm but deadly. The remaining guards scrambled, but he met them head-on, staff swinging, feet moving as if he danced through moonlight. Within minutes, all lay tied and silenced. Benaiah stood alone in the center of the camp, his breath steady. He looked up at the dark sky, stars blinking above him like watchful eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, "not for the strength to win, but for the wisdom to move unseen and strike without hate." He gathered the leaders, bound them, and led them back toward David's camp before the sun rose. As they climbed the final hill, the first light of morning stretched across the horizon, painting his path in gold. Benaiah knew he had saved the kingdom not through grand battle cries, but through quiet courage and precise faith. In that silence, he heard the gentle voice that had guided him since boyhood. "Well done. Keep walking." And Benaiah, warrior and servant, smiled softly and pressed on. When Benaiah returned to the camp with the captured conspirators, the soldiers dropped what they were doing and gathered around in stunned silence. Some had only just woken, rubbing sleep from their eyes, expecting an ordinary morning, not to see Benaiah leading a line of bound traitors through the misty dawn. A murmur spread like fire through dry grass. "He did it alone," someone whispered. "How did he move past so many guards without raising alarm?" another asked, wide-eyed. David emerged from his tent, the early light catching on his hair and cloak. His eyes went first to the prisoners, then to Benaiah. Relief and sorrow danced across his face in the same breath. Benaiah knelt before him, head bowed. "My king," he said, "the threat has been silenced. They will not reach your gates or your people." David stepped forward, placing a hand on Benaiah's head. "You have been my shield in dark hours," he said, voice thick with emotion. "But more than that, you have been my friend, my brother." Benaiah looked up, his eyes reflecting a tired but gentle light. "I did not guard you for my honor," he said. "I did it so Israel would see the faithfulness of a king who seeks God's heart." The gathered men stood still, their weapons hanging at their sides. For a moment it seemed the entire camp held its breath, as though waiting for a new chapter to begin. But then a voice cut through the hush. "What makes him so special?" a young warrior spat, stepping forward. His armor clinked awkwardly as he moved. "Why should one man get so much trust? Why not share his role? We all fight. We all bleed." Benaiah rose slowly, turning to face the young man. His eyes were calm, unwavering. "I never asked for this role," he said softly. "I took it because someone had to stand in the shadows while others slept. Someone had to carry the silent burden." The young warrior bristled, fists clenching. "That's easy to say once you have the king's favor," he snapped. "Prove you're not above us." A hush fell again. Benaiah held the young man's gaze, then reached for his spear, not to threaten, but to place it on the ground between them. "I am not above you," he said, stepping back and lifting his empty hands. "If you wish, take my place. Stand each night while your bones ache. Listen for whispers when your eyes long for sleep. Carry secrets no one else wants." The young warrior's mouth fell open. He looked at Benaiah's strong but worn hands, at the scars that marked years of silent battles, and at the quiet depth in his eyes. Slowly, his shoulders sagged. He dropped to one knee. "Forgive me," he whispered. "I didn't understand." Benaiah bent forward, lifting the young man to his feet. "You are brave," he said gently. "But bravery without humility becomes pride. We need both to guard this kingdom." David stepped forward then, his voice rising strong and clear. "You have all seen today what true service looks like," he said, sweeping his gaze across the camp. "Not loud boasts, but quiet sacrifice." As the sun rose higher, its light spilled across the faces of every soldier, warming the air and the hearts of those gathered. In that glow, Benaiah retrieved his spear and stood beside David, not above the men, but among them. A living reminder that true strength shines brightest when mixed with deep humility. And though no songs were sung that day, every man there carried a new story in his heart, of a warrior who chose to be a servant, and a servant who became a true hero in the eyes of God and man. In the days that followed, a new tension began to stir beneath the campfires and council meetings. King David had grown older, and whispers of succession drifted like smoke through the tents. Some men spoke of Adonijah, others of Solomon. Benaiah listened, his sharp eyes scanning every face, every hushed conversation. He had always fought enemies with swords and spears. Now he faced a different kind of battle, guarding a future he could not yet see clearly. One night, as the moon lit the camp in pale silver, David called for Benaiah privately. The old king's face looked tired, his hands trembling slightly as he held a clay cup of water. "Benaiah," David began, his voice hoarse but steady, "my time is near. Solomon will be king. He is wise, but young. Many will challenge him." Benaiah leaned forward, listening with unwavering focus. "I need you to protect him," David said. "Not just his life, his heart, his faith. Teach him what you know about true strength." Benaiah felt the weight of the words press into his bones. He had guarded David with every breath. Now he would pass that vigilance to a new generation. "I will do it," Benaiah said simply. "As I have stood for you, I will stand for Solomon." David smiled, his eyes shining with quiet gratitude. "Then the kingdom will be safe," he whispered. The next morning, as orange light spilled across the hills, Benaiah rode out to find Solomon. He found him near a grove of fig trees, studying scrolls under a wide canopy of leaves. Solomon looked up, surprised, as Benaiah dismounted. "Is there news from my father?" he asked quickly. Benaiah shook his head and set down his spear, stepping closer. "No news, only a task," he said. "A task to guard your life and your spirit, and to teach you how to guard others." Solomon studied him with young, curious eyes. "They say you fought lions and giants," he said. "They say your hands are stronger than iron." Benaiah chuckled softly. "My hands are strong," he admitted. But it was never these hands alone that won battles. It was the trust in the one who guided them. He motioned for Solomon to stand. "Show me your grip," Benaiah instructed, handing him a practice staff. Solomon fumbled at first, his fingers uncertain. Benaiah adjusted the young prince's stance carefully, moving his feet, straightening his shoulders. "When you stand," Benaiah said, "your heart must be as firm as your feet. When you strike, your spirit must move before your arm." Solomon tried again, this time with more confidence. His swing was awkward, but his eyes gleamed with determination. Benaiah watched closely, nodding. "You will lead armies one day," he said, "but the greatest battle will always be here." He tapped Solomon's chest lightly. "In the heart." Solomon lowered the staff, breathing hard but smiling. "Then teach me," he said earnestly. "Not just how to win fights, but how to carry this kingdom with courage." Benaiah placed a strong hand on Solomon's shoulder, feeling the fragile hope and fire beneath his skin. "I will teach you everything I know," Benaiah promised, "and when my strength fades, your heart will carry what mine once did." That evening, as the two sat under the fig trees, Benaiah shared stories of battles and secret struggles, not the tales told around fires to impress, but the quiet lessons learned in the pit with the lion, in the face of the giant, in the silent moments guarding David's life. For the first time, Benaiah realized that true strength wasn't just about facing the impossible alone, it was also about passing that strength to another, ensuring the courage did not end with his own story. And under the fading light, Benaiah felt peace settle over him like a soft cloak, knowing the fight was not over. It was simply changing shape. It wasn't long before Solomon's first true test arrived, a challenge not of swords and shields, but of whispers and sharp minds. Word came that Adonijah, David's other son, was gathering followers. He had already tried to claim the throne once, and now he stirred old loyalties among soldiers and elders who doubted Solomon's youth. One morning, as mist still clung to the ground, Solomon stood at the palace courtyard, hands clasped behind his back. His brow was furrowed, and his usually calm eyes darted across the courtyard as if searching for answers in the stones. Benaiah approached quietly, his step steady. Solomon turned as he neared, relief flashing in his young face. "Benaiah," Solomon said, his voice strained, "they say Adonijah is at the altar, claiming innocence and demanding mercy. What should I do? If I show weakness, they will rise against me. But if I strike too harshly, the people may turn their hearts away." Benaiah studied him for a long moment, then looked past him, out across the city rooftops glowing in the early light. "When I fought the giant Egyptian," Benaiah began slowly, "many said I should use brute strength alone. But it wasn't just the staff that won. It was watching, waiting, knowing the right moment to strike and the right moment to show mercy." Solomon listened intently, hanging on every word. "You have the sword," Benaiah continued, his voice low and strong, "but your true weapon is wisdom. Show them your courage, but let them also see your heart. Lead them to respect you, not just fear you." Solomon closed his eyes, breathing deeply. After a long pause, he opened them with new clarity. "I will summon Adonijah," Solomon said firmly. "I will show him that I am not weak, but I am also not thirsty for blood. If he remains loyal, he will live. If not—" Benaiah nodded, a small flicker of pride warming his stern features. "Then you will act, without hesitation," he finished for him. The courtyard began to fill with officials and guards, their whispers buzzing like restless bees. Solomon stood tall in the center, his voice echoing strong and steady when he called for Adonijah to be brought forward. Adonijah appeared, head lowered, his hands trembling at his sides. The crowd fell silent, waiting to see if the young king would falter. Solomon stepped forward, his gaze unwavering. "You sought mercy at the altar," he declared. "If you are truly loyal to me, you will go to your house in peace. But know this: the next time you raise your hand against me, you will not rise again." The entire courtyard held its breath. Then, slowly, Adonijah nodded, stumbling backward before turning to leave. As he disappeared into the shadows, a murmur spread, not of rebellion, but of respect. Many looked at Solomon with new eyes, seeing not just a boy, but a true king. Solomon turned back to Benaiah, his chest rising and falling with relief. "You were right," he said softly. "Strength is not only in striking, it is in knowing when not to." Benaiah stepped closer, resting a firm hand on Solomon's shoulder. "And you have learned today what many warriors never learn in a lifetime," he said. "A true king does not rule by fear alone, but by the balance of justice and mercy." As the crowd began to disperse, Solomon stood taller than before, his shoulders squared, his eyes brighter. Benaiah watched him for a moment, then turned his gaze to the sky, where clouds drifted like silent witnesses. In that moment, Benaiah knew his purpose had shifted once again, from warrior to guard and now to teacher, shaping a king who would lead not just with might, but with a heart tuned to God's quiet voice. And as the sun rose higher, Benaiah felt a deep, steady joy fill his spirit, a joy no victory on the battlefield had ever given. As the days passed, Solomon's reign grew stronger. Peace began to spread through the city like warm oil, and the people started to believe that David's son truly could lead them. But hidden in the shadows, old wounds still bled. Some of David's former allies struggled with Solomon's rise, whispering among themselves late into the night. One evening, after the city gates had closed and lanterns glowed in the palace halls, Solomon summoned Benaiah to his private chamber. The young king sat at a small cedar table, his hands clasped so tightly they trembled. "Benaiah," Solomon began, his voice low and heavy, "I must ask something of you. Something no king wants to ask a friend." Benaiah listened in silence, his eyes steady. "Joab," Solomon continued, "the commander, who once fought for my father, has taken refuge at the altar. He shed innocent blood and now plots against me in secret. He thinks the altar will protect him." Benaiah knew Joab well. They had shared battlefields, laughed around hidden fires, and once guarded David's life side by side. He swallowed hard. "What would you have me do?" he asked, though deep inside he already knew. Solomon's eyes shone with sadness. "Justice must be done," he said softly. "I need you to finish it. Not because I doubt your loyalty, but because I trust your heart to carry this burden with honor." Benaiah looked down at his hands. The same hands that had held a staff against a giant, had wrestled a lion in a frozen pit, had carried water to quench David's thirst. They were strong hands, but tonight they felt heavy beyond measure. He rose, his movements slow and thoughtful. "I will go," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Benaiah found Joab clinging to the altar, his hair wild, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Benaiah!" Joab snarled. "You would dare strike me here, at the altar of God!" Benaiah stood in the doorway, his chest rising and falling like the tide. "Joab," he said, his voice calm but edged with sorrow. "You stained your hands with innocent blood, turned your sword against brothers, and now hide behind sacred stones. Mercy has been offered many times. You chose this end." Joab spat, gripping the altar harder. "David needed me. You needed me. I fought so you all could live." Benaiah's eyes softened, and for a moment he saw Joab as he had been, fierce, loyal once, a brother in arms. "I do not forget your courage," Benaiah said, "but I cannot let your old glories cover new betrayals." He stepped forward slowly, each footfall echoing like a drumbeat in the empty chamber. Joab's voice broke into a hoarse whisper. "May God judge us both, Benaiah." Benaiah closed his eyes briefly, his hand tightening around the hilt of his sword. "He already has," he said quietly. In one swift motion, he ended it. The chamber fell silent, the echo of the final blow hanging heavy in the air. Benaiah stood there for a moment, breathing heavily. He knelt then, bowing his head low, whispering a prayer for mercy, for Joab, for himself, for the whole kingdom. When he returned to Solomon, his shoulders sagged beneath an invisible weight. Solomon rose, his face pale, but he stepped forward and embraced Benaiah. "You have done what had to be done," Solomon said, voice trembling. "You have saved this kingdom from ruin." Benaiah did not answer. Instead, he simply placed his sword at Solomon's feet and knelt, a silent vow shining in his steady eyes. In that moment, the king and his warrior understood each other completely. That leadership sometimes demands a price no one else can see, a burden that only the faithful can carry. And as dawn began to break over the hills once more, Benaiah stood again, not just as a warrior, but as a living example that true bravery is more than victory in battle. It is also the quiet willingness to do the hard things no one else will touch, to protect others even at the cost of your own heart. After Joab's death, a hush hung over the kingdom. People felt the shift in the air, like the first stillness before a coming storm or the quiet after a thunderclap. Solomon's rule grew stronger each day, but he knew he needed more than wisdom in the palace. He needed a shield for the kingdom, someone to guide and guard the army with both strength and heart. One morning, Solomon called Benaiah into the great hall. Sunlight spilled across the polished floors, catching on the golden vessels and carved cedar beams. "Benaiah," Solomon began, his voice firm yet kind, "I want you to lead my armies, not just as a commander of men, but as a teacher of courage and honor." Benaiah stood silently for a moment, his eyes drifting to the open windows where young soldiers practiced in the courtyard below. "I have always fought," Benaiah said softly. "But to teach, that is a different kind of battle." Solomon stepped forward, placing a hand on Benaiah's shoulder. "These young men need more than tactics," he said. "They need to learn when to strike and when to stand still. They need to know that bravery is more than swinging a sword." Benaiah's eyes softened. He looked back at Solomon and nodded once, deeply. "Then I will teach them," he said. "I will shape their hands, but also their hearts." That afternoon, Benaiah stood in the training yard, a simple staff in his hand. The young warriors watched him with wide eyes, expecting grand speeches or fearsome demonstrations. Instead, Benaiah stood quietly for a long moment. Then, Without warning, he spun the staff in a blur, planting it into the dirt with a heavy thud that echoed across the yard. "Strength," he said, "means nothing without purpose." He picked up a sword, handed it to the smallest of the young soldiers. "Show me your strongest swing." The boy raised the sword high, shouting as he swung, but his feet slipped and he fell awkwardly. Benaiah bent down, helping him up. "Louder is not stronger," he said gently. "Balance first, heart first." He went down the line, correcting stances, moving feet, straightening backs. Each young man's eyes widened as they felt the difference, their bodies learning lessons deeper than any shouted orders could teach. At the end of the day, the boys stood in a circle around him, dusty and tired, but glowing with a new kind of fire. "Why do you care so much about our hearts?" one finally asked. Benaiah looked around at them, his face calm and thoughtful. "Because," he said, touching his own chest, "every great victory begins here. You can win 1,000 battles with your arms and lose everything if your heart is not right." A hush settled over them, the kind of silence that feels heavy with meaning. That night, Benaiah stood on the wall above the courtyard, watching the stars flicker awake. He could hear faint laughter and soft conversations drifting up from the tents below. In that quiet, he felt a deep joy that surprised him. A joy not from taking lives or winning duels, but from planting seeds in young hearts. Seeds of courage, humility, and faith. Benaiah realized then, Ninko, that his final and greatest battle was not against lions or giants or traitors. It was to shape a generation that would protect the kingdom long after he was gone. And for the first time, he felt truly ready to let his spear rest and pass on the fire inside him. Years passed, and the kingdom of Solomon flourished like a tree planted by deep waters. Trade routes shimmered with colorful caravans, the temple rose in splendor, and songs of peace drifted across the hills. Benaiah's hair turned silver, but his eyes still burned bright. In the evenings he would walk alone beyond the walls, his steps slow but strong, listening to the hush of the olive groves and the whispering wind in the cypress trees. One evening, as the sunset painted the sky in brilliant streaks of orange and violet, Benaiah stopped at a small clearing overlooking the city. He planted his spear gently into the earth beside him and sat on a flat stone, his cloak wrapped around his shoulders. He closed his eyes and let the breeze wash over him, memories rising like warm embers from a fading fire. He remembered the lion's roar echoing in the frozen pit, the giant's furious charge on the dusty plain, and the gleam of Joab's eyes at the altar. He saw David's tired smile, Solomon's young hands gripping a staff for the first time, and the terrified faces of young soldiers who learned to stand tall under his watch. In those quiet moments, Benaiah felt no regret for the battles fought or the scars carried. He felt gratitude for each challenge that had shaped him and every chance he'd had to protect what was precious. A young guard from Solomon's army approached, hesitant. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Master Benaiah, why do you come here alone? Shouldn't a hero like you rest in the palace, surrounded by songs and servants?" Benaiah opened his eyes slowly and looked at the young man, a gentle smile lifting the corners of his mouth. "A true warrior's rest is not found in golden halls," he said. "It is found in knowing he followed the voice of God to the end, even when it led to quiet places." The young guard lowered his head, studying the worn hands that once held the kingdom's fate in their grip. "Do you miss the battles?" the guard asked, almost in a whisper. Benaiah chuckled softly, the sound like a distant drum. "I do not miss the roar of swords or the clash of shields," he said. "I miss the moment before the fight, that heartbeat of trust when you choose courage over fear." He looked out at the city lights twinkling below like stars fallen to earth. "But now, my battle is different," he continued. "I guard the memories. I guard the lessons passed on to you and others. I fight to stay faithful in the quiet season of my life." The young guard sat beside him, resting his helmet on his knees. The two sat in silence, the last colors of daylight fading into a blanket of stars above. After a while, Benaiah stood slowly, pulling his spear from the earth one final time. He looked at the guard and nodded. "Walk me home," he said. "Tonight, you will be my shield." As they moved toward the city, the guard glanced at Benaiah's weathered face and realized that true strength wasn't in youth or fame. It was in a heart that kept choosing to serve, to protect, and to trust God through every season. That night, as Benaiah entered the city gates, he felt the warmth of a quiet victory, the kind no crowd could ever cheer for, but that heaven surely did. He had faced lions, giants, and traitors. He had defended kings and taught young warriors. And through it all, he had listened for that still, small voice and followed it, step by step, until his last quiet walk home.